Study Section 2. The neuron. Introduction. A neuron is a nerve cell that is the basic building block of the nervous system. Neurons are similar to other cells in the human body in a number of ways. But there is one key difference between neurons and other cells. Neurons are specialized to transmit information throughout the body. This lecture enables you to understand the basic functions of neurons. Objectives. At the end of this lecture, you should be able to define neurons, list the types of neurons, and describe the structures of neurons. Contents. Neurons are also known as nerve cells or brain cells. They are the core components of the brain. The vertebrate spinal cord and the invertebrate ventral nerve cord and the peripheral nerves, all brain activities hinged on the workings of the brain cells or neurons. Kandel et al. 2000. These highly specialized nerve cells are responsible for communicating information in both chemical and electrical forms. Diagram on the major external features of a typical neuron. Types of neurons. There are three types of neurons. The sensory neurons respond to input from the senses. They respond to touch, sound, light, and numerous other stimuli affecting cells of the sensory organs that send signals to the spinal cord and the brain. Motor neurons send signals to control movements. Motor neurons receive signals from the brain and the spinal cord and cause muscle contractions and affect glands. Interneurons stand between the neurons that register what is out there and those that control movements. They are responsible for communicating information between different neurons in the body. Generally, neurons respond to stimuli and communicate the presence of stimuli to the central nervous system. Neurons differ in their sizes, shapes, and characteristics depending on the function and role of the neuron. Type. Structure of neurons. The structure of a neuron. To understand psychological events, you need to know a few facts about the structure of the neurons. Each neuron has certain parts. There are three basic parts of a neuron: the dendrites, the cell body, and the axon. The cell body. The central part of a neuron is called the cell body. Like all cells, it has a nucleus, which regulates the cell's functions, and a cell membrane, which is the skin of the cell. The axon. This is the sending end of a neuron. The axon is a long capable-like structure extending from the cell body along which signals travel to other neurons, muscles, or bodily organs. Some neurons have short axons, while others can be quite long. Although each neuron has only one axon, most axons divide into many branches called terminals, so that a neuron can send a message to more than one place at a time. At the end of the terminals are terminal buttons, which are knob-like structures that release chemicals into the space between neurons when the neurons have been triggered. Dendrites. Each neuron has only one axon, but a neuron may have many receiving ends. These are the dendrites. Their name is derived from the Greek word dendron, meaning three which makes sense when you look at tree-like of the dendrites shapes. The dendrites receive message from the axon of other neurons. So neurons have few dendritic branches, while others are highly branched to receive a great deal of information. Structural classification. Polarity. Most neurons can be anatomically characterized as unipolar, dendrite and axon emerging from same process. Bipolar, axon and single dendrite on opposite end of the soma. Multipolar, more than two dendrites. Functional classification. Afferent neurons conveys information from tissues and organs into the central nervous system and are sometimes also called sensory neurons. Efferent neurons transmit signals from the central nervous system to the effector cells and are sometimes called motor neurons. Interneurons connect neurons within specific regions of the central nervous system. Afferent and efferent can also refer generally to neurons which respectively bring information to or send information from the brain region. Neural impulses. In order for neurons to communicate, they need to transmit information both within the neuron and from one neuron to the next. This process utilizes both electrical signals as well as chemical messengers. The resting potential. When neurons are at rest, they maintain a negative charge within. This negative charge is called the resting potential. This potential arises because of how ions are distributed inside and outside the cells. Ions are atoms that are positively or negatively charged. During rest, more positively charged ions, which are also called cations and which consist mostly sodium ions, are outside the neuron than inside it. The more negatively charged ions, called anions, are inside the neurons. The action potential. The dendrites of the neuron receive information from sensory receptors or other neurons. This information is then passed to the cell body onto the axon. Once the information has arrived at the axon, it travels down the length of the axon in the form of an electrical signal known as an action potential. The membrane covering the axon has very small holes or pores called channels. The channels are open and closed. When particular channels are open, particular anions either flow into the cell from inside the cell to the surrounding fluid. When a neuron receives enough stimulation from other neurons, some of the channels in the cell membrane open, allowing a complex exchange of anions that change the charge in the axon. This exchange works its way down to the end of the axon. It finally causes terminal buttons to release chemicals that will affect other neurons. When this occurs, the neuron is set to fire. The shifting in charge that moves down the axon is known as an action potential. Action potential obeys the all or none principle. The all or none principle. The conduction of nerve impulse is an example of all or none response. In other words, if a neuron responds at all, then it must respond completely. The greater the intensity of stimulation does not produce a stronger signal but can produce more impulses per second. There are different types of receptor response to stimulus. Slowly adapting or tonic receptors most often respond to steady stimulus and produce a steady rate of firing. These tonic receptors most often respond to increased intensity of stimulus by increasing their firing frequency. Usually, as a power function of stimulus plotted against impulses per second. This can be likened to an intrinsic property of light, where to get greater intensity of a specific frequency, color, there has to be more photons as the photons can't become stronger for a specific frequency. There are a number of other receptor types that are called quickly adapting or phasic receptors, where firing decreases or stops with steady stimulus. An example of this is cane. When touched by an object, it causes the neurons to fire, but if the object maintains even pressure against the skin, the neurons stop firing. The neurons of the skin and muscles that are responsive to pressure and vibration are featuring accessory structures that aid their function. The pasina corpuscles are on such structure. They have concentric layers like an onion which form around the axon terminal when pressure is applied and the corpuscle is deformed. Mechanical stimulus is transferred to the axon which fires. If the pressure is ready, there are no more stimuli. Thus, these neurons typically respond with a transient depolarization during the initial deformation and again when the pressure is removed, which causes the corpuscles to change shape again. Other types of adaptation are important in extending the function of a number of other neurons. Elkart et al., 1983. In summary, in all or none principle, it is either an action potential occurs or not. Many neurons can fire hundreds of times a second because chemical reactions reset them so that they can fire again if they receive adequate stimulation. The threshold, the voltage at which a neuron fires or breaks away with an action potential, is called the threshold of excitation. The existence of a threshold of excitation implies that the generation of a nerve impulse requires an adequate stimulus. If the threshold level for depolarization or extension is not reached, the neuron will not fire. This is about 65 MV for most axons firing in neurons. This operates the all or none law. The all or none law states that a neuron either fires or does not fire. A neuron fires only if the intensity of a stimulus is adequate. Besides, once it is triggered, it is transmitted down the length of the axon with full force and remain the same size even when the intensity of a stimulus is adequate. Reaching the threshold for an action potential is similar to pulling the trigger of a gun. As you squeeze the trigger, nothing happens until you reach a critical point. At that point, a sequence of events begins that leads to the firing of the gun, and no actions will stop the sequence once it is initiated. The neuron doctrine. The neuron doctrine is the new fundamental idea that neurons are the basic structural and functional units of the nervous system. The theory was put forward by Santiago Ramon y Cajal in the late 19th century. It holds that neurons are discrete cells, not connected in a meshwork, acting as metabolical distinct units. As with all doctrines, there are some exceptions. For example, glia cells may also play a role in information processing. Witcher and Harris, 2007. Also, electrical synapses are more common than previously thought. Connor and Long, 2004. This means that there are direct cytoplasmic connection between neurons. In fact, there are examples of neurons forming even tighter coupling. The square giant axon arises from the fusion of multiple neurons that retain individual cell bodies. Crayfish giant axon consists of a series of neurons with high conductance and separate junctions. Cajal also postulated the law of dynamic polarization, which states that a neuron receives signals as its dendrites and cell body and transmits them as action potential along the axon in one direction away from cell body. Sabatini, 2003. The law of dynamic polarization has important exceptions. Dendrites can serve as synaptic output sites of neurons. Dijuristic et al., 2004. And axons can receive synaptic inputs. Summary. 1. The neuron doctrine is the new fundamental idea that neurons are the basic structural and functioning units of the nervous system. The theory was put forward by Santiago Ramon Y. Cajal in the late 19th century. 2. A neuron is a nerve cell that is the basic building block of the nervous system. 3. These highly specialized nerve cells are responsible for communicating information in both chemical and electrical forms. 4. There are 3 types of neurons. A. The sensory neurons respond to input from the senses. They respond to touch, sound, light, and numerous other stimuli affecting cells of the sensory organs that send signals to the spinal cord and the brain. B. Motor neurons send signal to control movements. Motor neurons receive signals from the brain and spinal cord and cause muscle contractions and affect glands. C. Interneurons stand between the neurons that register what is out there and those that control movements. They are responsible for communicating information. 5. There are 3 basic parts of a neuron: the dendrites, the cell body, and the axon. 6. When neurons are at rest, they maintain a negative charge within. This negative charge is called the resting potential. 7. Action potential obeys the all or none principle. 8. The voltage at which a neuron fires or breaks away with an action potential is called the threshold of excitation. 9. Reaching the threshold for an action potential is similar to pulling the trigger of a gun. As you squeeze the trigger, nothing happens until you reach a critical point. Post-test. 1. What is a neuron? 2. Explain resting potential and action potential. 3. Describe the structure of a neuron. End of study section 2. Thanks for listening.